Hi everyone! Welcome to my channel. This is Yvette. In this video, I'll be showing how to use a yarn gauge to determine the number of stitches and rows you'll need for the perfect size bra cup every time. Okay, let's get started. Step 1. Determine the height and base of the bra cup and the type of stitch you'll be using. For this bra cup, I want it to be 7 inches tall, 5 inches wide, and I'll be using double crochet stitches. Step 2. Get the yarn gauge. The yarn gauge is the number of stitches and rows for a specific measurement, say 2 inches. To get that, crochet a small swatch that is around 3x3 or 4x4 inches using the yarn, hook, and stitch you'll be using for the project. So here I'm just making 20 chain stitches, doing an extra 2, and then making a double crochet in the third stitch away from the hook and every stitch after. This should give me around 4 inches. Here's the first row. I have 20 double crochet stitches. Next, turn the work, chain 2, make a double crochet in the same stitch and in every stitch after. Here's the second row. Make sure it also has 20 double crochet stitches. And just keep repeating that. Turn the work, chain 2, double crochet in each stitch until you have about 3 or 4 inches. Here's the swatch once it's done. You can see it's a bit tapered here in the beginning, so take the measurements from the stitches in the middle. I also want to start with a right side facing row. I'll be using this Susan Bates knit check. It just makes it easier to count the number of stitches and rows, but if you don't have this, you can use a ruler. Make sure that first stitch is snug up right against that corner. Then count the number of stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then half of the next stitch peeking through, so that's 8.5 stitches for every 2 inches. And then count the number of rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a little bit of the next row peeking through, so that's 5.25 rows for every 2 inches. Step 3. Use the gauge to determine the number of rows for half of the base. So 5 inches divided by 2 equals 2.5 inches. We know that for every 2 inches there are 5.25 rows, so we need to find out the number of rows for every 2.5 inches. To get that, multiply 2.5 by 5.25 and divide it by 2, which is 6.5625 rows. I'll round this down to 6 rows instead of rounding up to 7, and that's fine because it'll account for the stretching of the yarn. Step 4. Use the gauge to determine the number of stitches for the height minus half of the base, so that's 7 inches minus 2.5 inches equals 4.5 inches. From the base, we know that 6 rows equals 2.5 inches. This means that we also covered 2.5 inches out of the 7 inches needed for the height. So now we need to determine the number of stitches for the remaining 4.5 inches. We know that for every 2 inches there are 8.5 stitches, so we need to know the number of stitches for every 4.5 inches. To get that, multiply 4.5 by 8.5 and divide it by 2, which is 19.125 stitches. I'll round this down to 19 stitches. You can decrease this number by a couple of stitches to account for the stretching of the yarn. Here's the sample bra cup that I made. You can see I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows, and then 19 stitches, a stitch to turn the row, and 19 on the other side for the first row. The base came out at around 5 inches, and the height is 7 inches. Now I'd like to share some tips with you. Tip number 1, keep a record of the gauge, especially if you often use a specific yarn and hook for bra cups, so that you don't have to make a swatch each time. And if you're making a bra cup with similar measurements, you already know how many stitches and rows you're gonna need. Tip number 2, if you're not happy with how it came out, don't frog it yet. Make a second cup with the adjustments you have in mind. And if you end up preferring the first one, at least you don't have to start from scratch. And tip number 3, if the curve of the bra cup doesn't align with the center of the bust, make the cup a bit flatter. You can do that by adding more stitches to the top of the cup. For example, if it usually takes 3 stitches to turn the row, make 4 or 5 instead. This is for bra cups that are taller than they are wide. A flatter cup will drape better around the bust than a very structured one. Thank you so much for watching! Please like, comment, subscribe, and share to support this channel. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram at StringsStrandStrung. Okay, see you on the next one. Bye!